Welcome, all of you, to this month's edition of Yahara Webinars. Uh, Adam and James with you as usual, and special guest this week is Guy Starbuck, friend of Yahara and now CTO of a medical device startup company. We're going to be talking to him about what his journey has looked like as he's gone into a wildly different world than just straight software here. So Guy, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, great to be here.
I guess I'd like to just start us off. You've had a unique transition here between sort of your software background that you originally came up in and now a very different CTO role as part of this medical device startup.
Sure.
Talk us through a little bit of that transition. What surprises you most about the medical device space?
From my background, I kind of first got into management in a company called Stericycle in Lake Forest, Illinois. It's a regulated medical waste company. And so working in the regulated software, I learned a lot about that and kind of running in this kind of medium-sized company, working with different departments. I moved up to Madison, Wisconsin in 2008. I joined Yahara Software and was immediately put in with medical device practice. So working with medical device companies, working on software projects around Madison. And it was there's a lot to learn there as far as design control, quality management for medical devices. It's a definitely different level of rigor, but I really enjoyed that. So about 8 years with Yahara, and predominantly or a majority of those projects in medical device. And this opportunity came along for this startup. And the first few years were really developing the MVP of our device, getting that FDA cleared. So there really was mostly really transitioning into continuing to write code, do design, do software, but also the regulatory side, which I already had experience with. But then the transition in 2018, we got our 510(k) clearance with FDA for the device, which we can talk about the device as well, what it does. But essentially, from the pathway there, we hired a CEO, raised our first series of funding, and then we're off to the races, hiring people, building up an office, and that's when things really changed for the CTO role drastically. Our device is it's a software medical device for oncologists, for essentially for treatment planning for patients with advanced metastatic cancer. So it's targeting that late stage cancer, and it's really applying some pretty unique, powerful technology to give the oncologists a lot better visibility into exactly how all the lesions in the body are responding to treatment so that they can do the proper treatment planning or better, improve treatment planning, improve outcomes.
So, I mean, I know we've talked before, Guy, for on this topic before, but and you've kind of mentioned sort of like that shift that you were just talking about there as CTO. Like, what were some of the biggest sort of like oh my moments as you were kind of digging in, as things were starting to heat up, and you're just like, you got to like juggle all these things.
Right.
Looking back, maybe what were some of like the pivotal things where you're like, well, maybe it would have been better to do this a different way, or I'm glad I shifted focus here to pave the way for a smoother future.
Yeah. Well, getting into the kind of the broader company, so the CTO is I kind of think of it like an NFL head coach. Like they either come from a offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator background. Offensive being kind of software engineering, defensive being the IT, and it kind of colors what you bring to it.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, and so but coming in, defense wins championships, right? So I think that was it kind of snuck up on me, but kind of coming in and saying, I know how to do the software. I know how to set up an agile team, get stuff delivered. And a lot of that's through the cloud. You don't even need a lot of infrastructure physically. But when you have an office with people sitting in the seats and you have to set up, new employees have laptops and we have a network and all that stuff, it kind of sneaks up on you. It kind of snuck up on me. We started out, we had 5 people. we get an office space. I get some Wi-Fi controllers. I figure, well, we need more than just a router, so I get a cheap hardware firewall off of Amazon and configure the VPN myself, like that, and that's just takes time. But you get it running, and then all of a sudden you have 10 people, and now it's a whole different scale. And you come in Monday with all these plans, and the mesh Wi-Fi is down. Oh, great! Who's going to work on that? Well, it's you, So, so one thing I would say I would have done probably differently is I tried to do it ourselves for a long time, even after we had the funding to outsource some of it. And so we have a MSP. I went through a few of them, and we're currently using a managed service provider for IT to handle kind of the help desk employee setups. It's a company called IT Strategies Group in Waunakee. And then they also can outsource services for like cloud monitoring. Some of the really, they can scale and help with a lot of that. And there's a lot of knowledge in there that it's just better to outsource that, I think.
Right. Well, and I think maybe that's a common theme with us engineers, science types, right? I can DIY this, right? I can handle it all, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's like the best, it's fun to order hardware, right? And it's fun when the server shows up, but then about 15 minutes later, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to get into? So
why am I doing this?
Right.
Well, and I think that's the point. So, right, there are other things that you needed to focus on strategically. You mentioned, like the device you're building, one of the first things that comes to mind is, the regulatory, the compliance requirements that go along with that. I mean, somebody's got to be the strategic leader, the visionary on how, as you mentioned, it's one thing to deliver the software, right? But to deliver the software with a number of constraints, how does that sort of work into the process of, what you're thinking of and how you're planning that out?
Sure. I mean, as far as the software, so we have the co-founders of the company. There's the academic co-founders are medical physicists and oncologists who basically invented the technology, the method and system. And a lot of it was developed at UW-Madison in the lab there. And then as far as operationally, that's myself and then the COO, who is more the business and clinical trial side. With that makeup, I guess, the quality management, the whole regulatory side, I had a lot of experience on doing there's kind of different sides of it. You have the actual product development has to be developed within the specific, constraints. And I was familiar with a lot of those through my work, through different medical device companies to a point. You learn more as you are the one who finishing it all off. And then on the operational side, there's the whole company needs to be running with it's auditable. We're regulated software, so the entire company's operations are auditable. They don't just come and look at the device development. They also may look at your, vendor qualification. How did you make sure this vendor's a good one, and so forth. I guess another thing we tried to do, we did ourselves at the beginning, I think a lot of people do, is we came up with the quality management system. So quality management system is it's not even a software system necessarily. It's just it's a system of documents, procedures, and policies that by following them, you will generate evidence that you are compliant, right? So it's kind of red tape overhead, but it's geared towards the compliance. And you can get a lot of benefit out of it too. I mean, to make sure you don't drop the ball on certain things, which is good. But at the beginning, for their first 510K, we wrote the quality system ourselves. We did it kind of just based on what we read. I read through the 20 Code of Federal Regulations, 21 CFR 820, which governs medical device quality systems, and we came up with the basic pieces and then submitted it, and it actually got through FDA, so it was good enough. Once we got out, raised the money and started running the company, and we're having more auditors coming in, we purchased a one that was also based on Word documents. It was basically a prepackaged kind of more full system, but it was still Office documents that were doing physical signatures. And then finally, after suffering through a few years, we migrated to an eQMS, and there's a few good vendors on the market. It has e-signature, it kind of traces the documents for you. And that's another thing I would have, in hindsight, outsourced probably sooner. But you're flying the plane while you're building it, so you gotta, you prioritize what you're going to do.
I think it's wild to think about physical signature processes and
Yeah,
how you're going to just manage day-to-day operations and also be using that to be building innovative technology. So I think one of the things I'd like to lean into a little bit here is some of that innovation, like what's the process look like? How fast can you move
yeah.
versus where do you need to take your foot off the gas and ensure the regulatory compliance? How do you balance those?
Yeah, and I had done a lot of thinking even before this AIQ about there's a lot of discussions I know with different customers, different people we were working with about how do you do agile development or be as lean and agile as you can within the constraints of that. I mean, the medical device regulations are written assuming you are manufacturing a physical device. That's what they're written for. The software medical device is kind of a niche. It's getting to be bigger now, but so there's a lot of assumptions that you do, it's a very waterfall. Like, so it pushes you towards, you do all your specifications, you go to have these gates, to go through design reviews, and then you can move on to shipping it to manufacturing. With software, I'm technically the head of engineering, IT, and production, right? So as CTO, the engineering is 99%, and production is basically you have a build and you say deploy it, right? So for software, it's just you got all your commits lined up, and deploying that to the cloud. We manufacture one and push it out there, and that's our production process. And so that's a different approach. I guess, yeah. Remind me of your question again. This is about. Oh yeah, how do we do the software development? Yeah, so within the engineering, right? We have the specifications. We try to run off of basically high level initiative product management. So we want to get these type of things in to the next release, but what exactly fulfills that, we want to be as lean as possible. So the way we've done it is we define those initiatives, and then we go into a cycle where we're doing kind of a Kanban development, flowing through, getting as much as we can, and then as we get we keep having new requirements come in, and we have our dates we want to meet, and then those kind of come together and say, when we have a release candidate ready that has everything we want, and we cut everything we don't need, that then we do a code freeze, and then we go back into regulatory waterfall world. But during that cycle, we take as long as is needed and works for the business timeframe. And it takes about a month or so to do for the full release. It takes a month plus to do the clinical validation. We have to run all kinds of scans through the system to make sure they match ground truth, and then capture all the objective evidence that goes into the technical file. So doing that release process properly is time consuming. So we do this as infrequently as possible, but
you are keeping some agility in the development process.
I think we are doing as good as we can. I mean, you always reflect on it and see if you can improve it. Yeah.
And that I think is one of the biggest differences between sort of the pure software operation, where you're thinking about agility and speed and how quickly can you get the feature out the door. Whereas a lot of your process is tuned around, okay, I have to stop at some point and recertify and make sure we're in compliance.
Yeah, and I mean, putting together the documentation for a full software release is a month or two, but if you have to file with FDA, if you change your claims, if you change your risk profile, change your clinical data, now you're looking at 3 to 6 months of delay. So you file, you get some meetings, you get it through. It could be as quick as 3 months, but 3 months is an eternity, right, in software. So by that point, things have moved on. One of the things we've done, I think, that has really helped is we actually split. Originally, our device was one thing. It went from taking the raw DICOM files, the PET scans, clear through to generating the report data that goes to the physician. but the part that's really the medical device, it has the really the risk profile is the middle part where it's doing the algorithms, doing the AI, it's finding the lesions and matching them and so forth. So we split our product into 3 different devices. The middle one is the class 2 medical device that's regulated by FDA. But on the front end, the DICOM pre-processing, and on the back end, the report formatting, we pulled those into what they call a medical device data system. It's a different regulation. It's where you don't have to file 510Ks because it's not doing all it's doing is interpreting or converting existing data that another device creates. So that really helped us. So now, because realistically, the core algorithm, once it's validated and works, the changes all come on the back end on the reporting. We want to tweak it. We want to render something a little differently. We want to put different MIPS on the screen to demonstrate different things. Well, all that data exists. But we can iterate a lot more quickly with that device. And then that's more like a week and a half to close out a release and file the paperwork. It's a lot lower.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, great insight. I was recently out in Boston at the Resi Ventures conference, and on a panel where one of the topics was interacting with the FDA and how those processes worked, and I guess to that point, splitting things up in a logical way that makes it easier for you to be more agile. It seems like a great way. It's something every startup should probably do to analyze their process. But I'm kind of curious, over the years that you've been doing this, have you seen some evolution in how the FDA approaches the certification process, particularly with software and as AI is coming into the fold? And I guess overall, how has your experience been? I've heard that I've heard pretty good things. They're open to discussions, trying to make it as easy as possible for startups. I'm curious if you have any questions or maybe suggestions for people that are going through this process to just make that a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I guess I wouldn't say my experience is they make it easier for startups, but they are reasonable and they're mission focused. Like the people who've worked there to a person have been, their job is to make sure that devices on the market are safe and effective, period. Right. So the safety, if you've done your work, and this goes into the cybersecurity stuff too, which I know we'll touch on, but if you've done your groundwork and defined your hazards and you have your mitigations documented, then you've clinically proven it's accurate, then you've proven your safety. The effectiveness, you submit papers that support it. So then it really comes sometimes down to just kind of wordsmithing. So when you file the public facing piece of your clearance is this letter, a 510K letter that has your basically what do you call the claims? So your intended use or indications for use and your device description. And those are, if you change those, that's no longer the same device. So you can't change that. But they're very, that a lot of the time goes through, and it'll even be, you get to one little phrase or a couple of words and they'll say, well, that's problematic. Let's talk about that. Because what you're saying is not what you've proven. It's not, you need to be more clear of what your device really is doing. It's not been anything that's really made the device different or the use different, but it's more just clarifying it for what they're clearing you to market. So that's been interesting. But yeah, I think they've been responsive. We've got actually the last filing, we had a lot of interaction with the reviewer and a lot of good suggestions from him that ended with a successful clearance. So
it's always good to hear. I think
it was a different experience.
I think it's a daunting thing. I think there are a lot of CTOs that maybe go into this without some of the background you have, that understanding how to work through that process efficiently is obviously critical.
Yeah, the first filing and the second one were very different. The first one in 2018 was it was desktop software. It was running the algorithms really on that MVP. And the reviewer then, and it had some machine learning, but not any any CNN or really heavier AI in it. So it was but even at that point, that was brand new. So that was a different experience. It was the more recent one with more AI and more data, there was a lot more focus on that backing data. To how did we train it? Where did it come from?
Mhm.
How did we keep it pristine and not spoil our own? You have to keep your the data scientists who are training the model, our medical physicists and AI engineers, are not allowed to, we have to prove they can't even see the validation data ever, because we don't want it to bleed in there, and all of a sudden we train to, we tweak the training to make it work better. That's a no-no. And then you can only use that validation data once, which can get expensive. But once you use it once, for our next 510K, we got to have all brand new validation data that's not been seen before, which means it's not used for training. So that's part of the operation too.
Yeah, that has that been a challenge to kind of keep that data pool flowing?
I mean, yeah, it's always it's one of those things that the science team here is always on the lookout for sources. And then getting data is one thing, but then getting it annotated professionally. I mean, radiologists don't work for peanuts. So if you need to get it annotated, you gotta, there's one of the things we've done is a lot of work with like clinical trials with pharma companies, things like that, to support. And some of that might be, for some of them, where we get like residual use of the data. So that's a way to get some of it that we can train on to improve the product. When we're doing clinical treatment of actual patients, it's pretty much across the board. No, you're not. That's just for clinical treatment. You're not to use that to train new models, which I think is good. That patients didn't sign up for that. The trial patients did, but the actual cancer patients didn't. So, it makes sense.
It's interesting. I've noted this time and time with different conversations with individuals. Like the success of these projects, it's so much. It's technical, it's business, it's the relationships, having like that flow. I mean, to be really successful, you really need like all of these sort of parts of the business working together to that clean pipeline.
Yeah. Yep.
So let's pivot just a little bit and maybe turn and talk about sort of the technical leadership side of this, some of the team building aspects. Particularly with a startup like this. You say you're coming out of the university experience, so your founders are um, in most cases a couple of professors that have put years into this and worked on publishing the papers, but are not necessarily the technical experts that are going to take it and scale it into being a product. Talk us through a little bit of what's it like to come in and start building out the team around a good idea, but with a couple of founders like that are not ready to build a team.
Yeah, I mean, our academic founders were brilliant and are very much still involved, but not day to day here at AIQ, right? So they are still working at the university, but and supporting it. But yeah, I think the actual making the product and the company, yeah, it's a whole different approach. There's more trade-offs, and just constraints around what you can do. And then as we raise a seed round, we raise a Series A funding. That's not as much as you would want, right? It's never enough, right, to do everything you want. So there's always, I recruited the team out of my network in Madison to a great extent, which was great. A lot of people, I was lucky to have some great people join from that and build a dream team to do this. We got I think 15 releases out now over the course of medical device software over the course of 4 years. It was pretty phenomenal. So but yeah, building the team, I guess the first person I hired was a QA lead, because I don't want to do that and kind of can't do it, right? You don't want this, people who write the code can't be the ones running the tests, but also it's a mindset. People who love testing, I want them to work for me because I don't. And so that was fruitful. But then getting a lead software engineer to kind of basically architect our migration to the cloud, and then building that team from there. scaling out QA and engineering a little bit. And in our agile process, having a requirements engineer, kind of scrum master, product owner. It's a small team, but we can get a lot done.
So those are all things that you would expect to find on any software team. Anything special in the more regulated space? Any extra consideration there?
I mean, I guess it's definitely nice to find someone who has done medical device software, just so they don't rail against the constraints you have and don't understand them. And it does take, no software engineer wants to, we get to code freeze and I'm like, okay, now I need you to write a 200-page technical specification of everything. I mean, it's a lot easier nowadays. You write,
no,
yeah, exactly. But so you need people who are on board with that kind of thing. But I mean, it's really the time, and I think we've set up with the EQMS and with our processes enough structure that it's manageable. The filing. I mean, I have experience with it, and some of our testing requirements people do, and manage all that stuff. So, and I mean, ideally the software engineers have moved on to the next feature. We're getting, while we're wrapping up the previous one, the previous release. And so to a great extent, we've got that managed. But yeah, having people who understand the design, the device design history file, why you're doing it, the risk management, it's really good to have that coming in the door.
And you've mentioned a number of pieces that you should have delegated earlier, or that you needed to delegate to get off the ground. You talked a little bit about the QA and the testing mindset. You talked about when you should have brought in the QMS system. Is there anything else? Are there others of those kinds of big technical delegations that have tripped you up along the way, or that you should have approached earlier?
I mean, I think I can't think of anything else offhand other than really the IT outsourcing and the EQMS that we could have benefited from coming earlier. I'm sure there's other things, but you're facing the problem in front of you at any given time, and so I think we kind of ridden that rocket as well as we could.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
What about kind of curious, recently, as we've seen, more and more, AI tools kind of come online. I mean, obviously your core product is based on machine learning algorithms, but have you and the team been, leveraging some of the newer tools to sort of help accelerate either the engineering itself or some of the regulatory process, management that goes along with it?
Yeah, it's an interesting. So because it's a little scary, right? But to hand off things, the way we've been leveraging some of the AI like copilots and so forth is well, for the code writing, using it to help find it. I wish I'd had, when I was doing the first version of the software, I probably would have been 6 months earlier if I'd had access to this type of thing. So you're always like, how in MATLAB do I set up a combo box? This is the 6th time I've done this month, looking that up. So that would have saved a ton of time. And so I want people to leverage that, but I might very much stress that the code is yours. There's no vibe coding here in medical device software. What you get out of there, of the AI you're putting in, you're responsible for, and there's going to be peer code reviews, and it's not worse, but you just need to be on top of it. And starting with a good architecture, I think, is important too. We have a lot of stuff already in place, so I think we've gotten a lot of benefit out of those tools already. On the business side or the regulatory side, it's kind of the same thing. Like one example where we our IT, we had needed to, for the cybersecurity, to author like a cybersecurity risk management document that basically calls out everything that could possibly be a risk, we've addressed it, with our procedures, and that's part of the package to file. Dennis, who's our architecture and engineering director, used ChatGPT quite a bit to stub it out and worked. I mean, it still took a month, but I think it's actually beneficial to use that because there's a lot of cyber threats out there. If you do it by hand off of some article you found or Google searches, you're just going to get a lot better comprehensive results from the AI and not miss anything.
Right.
And then he still then had to take that and fill in how did we, meet all that stuff. I think that's a good example of a good use of it. Things like summarizing, documents, summarizing how do we be compliant with this ISO. I think that's useful just for research like that. Can you summarize the new guidance that just came out from FDA? I think that's useful because nobody.
But in the same way as the code, right? Okay, but
right.
So I've got this now. I have to kind of go back, vet it, make
Yeah,
sure.
that's my philosophy now, and being also really careful. I tell people don't go to a public ChatGPT and upload our IP and our code base or meeting minutes of a private meeting. We don't you got to be a little bit careful with that stuff. So we're using the Anthropic, the Claude, and have a contract with them, so that keeps that private. And just you had to think about that stuff.
Right. Go Claude, by the way.
Yeah,
my favorite.
Good. Yeah, it's pretty good. Pretty great.
I think that dovetails pretty nicely with advice that we've offered a lot of folks of really needing to have a strategy in place before you're just going out and using these AI tools sort of willy-nilly. You mentioned the cybersecurity aspect of this a little bit, and I would be curious to hear more sort of what the FDA is looking for. I know they're asking you to demonstrate you can patch vulnerabilities quite quickly when they're identified so that you are keeping the device itself secure, this piece of software in your case. It seems a little at odds with the longer, slower release process and the,
Right.
how have they started approaching how quickly some of this stuff is evolving?
I guess as far as the vulnerability patching, yeah, that's so this cybersecurity guy. So Congress empowered the FDA to enforce cybersecurity compliance in I think September of 2023. They released the guidance that said we are now going to reject filings that don't meet certain cybersecurity guidelines, and here's our advice on how to do it. And what that consists of is it's really there's the patching piece, so that's a big piece of it. They want, like, when you for the device itself, we need to assess all the open source libraries and vulnerabilities in them, and that's non-trivial, right? So if like our main analysis code base has I don't even know 30 some libraries referenced. It's in Python. But if you run a software bill of materials, which you can do off of GitHub, you can download the software bill of materials. It walks the tree, and you end up with 300 libraries because each of those uses other ones, and you may end up with 3 versions of the same library because different libraries are using them. One of which has some reported vulnerability. So you kind of get into that world, version management. But so what they want is you to do that. You can take that bill of materials, run it against a NIST database, and they will return a report to say, here's all the vulnerabilities. Here's things that have flagged. They have a critical or high severity vulnerability. And then for each one of those, I think at the end of it, or that analysis, we ended up with like 6 libraries that said they had high vulnerabilities. But then you can look at what they are and say, because our code runs in Docker containers, in Kubernetes, in the cloud, doesn't have a web front end, none of them were applicable, right? So, but you have to document that. We had to go through and say, here's our list. And if the FDA has the software bill of materials, they could run it and say, well, that doesn't match the list you show. But, it has to actually be correct. So all that stuff has to line up. And then once again, you have to have that plan to patch. Our device is in the cloud, so it's about as easy as it could be to patch as a medical device. You still need to run, if you're changing the code, you're changing these libraries, you still have to run a regression test. So it still takes a few weeks to get out. But what we have is a they call a post-market surveillance procedure, where I think it's every 60 days, or we go through a checklist, and one of those things is, hey, let's check for vulnerabilities again. And if GitHub's doing that all on the fly too. You get notifications from GitHub, hey, there's a new vulnerability in this library. Do you want me to bump it up? So with those tools, kind of the active notification and manually going and running it, we can plan that and do a patch release. And so far, I mean, like I said, our analysis is running pretty much encapsulated in Kubernetes, the things that are going to be vulnerable. So it hasn't been a problem yet. But I think if you were creating a device that's in the hospital, or God forbid, like an implant or something that is connected to a network, that's a lot harder to patch, right? And do a firmware update. And those are problems I'm glad I don't have, but it's something people have to think about.
Please don't.
Yeah.
Update my implant.
Yeah, I mean, especially for other markets like Europe, there's definitely we are going to need to have an on-premise version, non-cloud version of our product, just because different data protection laws there.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a big overhead with that. You have to have field service, you have to have some kind of connecting, we have to have a lot more rigor around the patching and security.
Right. So are you US only right now?
We're cleared in US and Australia, actually.
Okay. And you've got plans to move to Europe?
It's plans. It's the medical device regulations in Europe. Their data protection regulation, the GDPR, that came out a few years ago. I think they still haven't caught up. There was just a lot of chaos in regulation and getting, you get a CE mark. I don't know if you've seen that on devices you've bought, but that means it's approved by EU for marketing. You do that for medical device, but getting through that GDPR has been challenging. So we've actually pushed that off strategically for a while.
Yeah. I think we've heard similar feedback from others as well, doing that same thing. Have you kind of gone through an exercise of we think it's going to be like X% more effort to get it done there versus FDA is still not clear? Just kind of curious magnitude of effort more
as far as the regulatory side.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's our regular consultant said it's better to just wait for the dust to settle. So we haven't even done that analysis yet.
Gotcha.
And I've heard that from other places too. I'm sure it's evolving. And then, the cybersecurity, the ISO 14971, the new cybersecurity guidance coming out is going to hit Europe too in the next, I think, year or so. So that'll just make things even more complicated. I mean, we know how to do it, but getting it through that, I know it's a long process and kind of expensive. Mm-hmm. We did get I'm going to say something that's probably really pedantic, but I think it's interesting. But we did get for Australia, we needed to get a regulatory audit it was called MDSAP, Medical Device Single Audit Program. So this is where instead of the FDA coming to audit you for compliance, you actually pay a company to come and audit you more difficult audit. Okay. But then that is actually good. It's and they come back every year and kind of refresh it. But then you're cleared, at least from an audit standpoint, in half a dozen countries, including Brazil, Japan, Australia is one, and I believe Germany, a couple in Europe, and Canada. So you still need to file the CE mark separately, but that's one of the things you would have to have checked off. And so we've done that, and that was a good, interesting experience too. Kind of really stress tested our QMS and our processes in a good way.
Yeah, it sounds like good advice. Hard, right?
Yeah, but it's like
put it on hard mode and see what comes out, but probably makes it more efficient long term.
And to me, I mean, when the FDA auditors come, they call this is my understanding, is they call your number and they tell you we're going to be there a week from today, which will be like Monday or something of the next week. And if you let that go to voicemail and don't check it, they still show up. There's no excuse, they're still there. And if your CEO's on vacation, well, they're still showing up, so By doing the MDSAP, we pick the date, work with the auditor, and we kind of keep that rolling, and it's just more controlled and easier to plan.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then certainly if you're going to go outside of US, it's worthwhile, I think.
That's good advice.
Then the New Zealand clearance, my understanding, so we actually are cleared in New Zealand too. And that was basically, we just had to show them that we were cleared in Australia, and New Zealand was like, okay, so more or less. Which makes sense too, but I think thought that was interesting. So there's different levels of rigor for these filings.
Yeah, fascinating and broad landscape
Mhm.
there. Well, as we're getting towards the end of the hour here, maybe throw out just another appeal to the chat if anybody has questions. But as we're waiting for any possible questions to roll in, Guy, looking back, lessons learned so far, are there any couple things you might call out as words of advice to a company like yours starting out on this journey, as a North Star to be paying
Mhm.
attention to help kind of skip some of the stumbles
Hmm.
along
Yeah.
the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that have helped me are, I think, even back at Stericycle, getting involved in all different parts of the business, getting to know, work with the controller, working with the sales, and understanding how that all works together. That's beneficial. Embracing the regulation, like I said, regulations are just another system. You can once you figure out how it works, then you can leverage that to actually have it be beneficial to you while also being compliant. And I think, I guess for startups, I think there's an expectation, and I think it's true, that the CTO is going to need to be able to still write some code. So you're not going to, because when you first start out, that MVP, there's really not that much funding. So you need to be able to do it all. And so I, through my career, I tried to keep my head in the code a bit, even if I go for months at a time without writing code. If there's a chance to work on a little utility to help me with my job, and I can learn some new framework, I try to make time for that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's just I think to people at startups, it's a lot of, we were just talking about this the other day. It's the best. People who like to wear a lot of hats and have a broad set of skills rather than a deep in one area. I think it kind of is helpful.
Right. Maybe hire out those deep experts, the QA,
Right.
the infrastructure, help out in the.
Yep. Yeah.
One question here, looking ahead, any emerging technology, regulatory considerations that you're most excited about, or that give you, pause, concern?
Yeah. I mean, just watching these agentic AIs, developing software, that it seems like you figure out how things work, and then 3 weeks later it changes, the whole landscape. So I think I definitely think there's an impact. It worries and is exciting, right? So it's going to empower people to write a lot more software faster, which is great for startups and business. I think it's going to take a while I know what you guys think, but I think it's going to take a while for the industry to, especially, getting outside of the technical people, to understand the impact really, and, is it, and the risks, because it's moving really fast.
Right. No, yeah, to me it feels a lot like, the early 2000s, right? I mean, everything's changing and evolving, and probably even at a faster pace. But you look at product life cycles now that you can measure in weeks as opposed to maybe months.
Yeah.
So how do organizations respond? And I'd wonder if, especially in like a startup mode, do you become worried that, well, it took a while to get here, but could, another company come in and do similar things, or bring competition to the table, faster. And so staying staying at the forefront of
Yeah,
that, like
right.
ourselves, I think is important to making sure that our companies stay relevant and
Yep.
competitive.
Yeah, definitely trying to keep on top of things and understand how to use them. In the medical device, it's a little. I mean, there's all the clinical side too, which you can't just make up quickly. But
Right.
it's so there's barriers there. But yeah, you're right. One of the great advantages of a startup is you can move and pivot faster than the big companies. Just that they have more inertia, right, and more. It's more difficult to get things done. And so we need to keep, everyone's starting to use AI, and so more as much as we responsibly can. So just got to keep on top of that and understand it.
Right.
So I'm going to offer what I think is maybe the summarization of what you just said,
Okay.
which is keep the agility and really leverage the compliance aspects of it, get good at working within that system, and that those two together will keep you in a pretty good place. Does that come close to capturing it?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, we can't. I certainly don't want to have an auditor come in and say, "Well, this whole block of code, this doesn't look right. Where did that come from?" And I'm like, "I don't know." So you can't have that. So, and likewise with the documentation that's getting gone over. I actually was at a conference recently, and we were talking about using the regular, like pretty soon the auditors are going to be using AI to check your quality system, and then quality systems would be using AI to generate all these records, and so AI is going to be arguing with itself.
I'll have my AI call your AI.
Right, exactly.
We'll get a meeting.
Yeah, but yeah, the compliance does slow. It makes you slow down and be careful, and I think that's the strength of it, and it's also the challenge of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting juxtaposition of technology and process.
Yeah.
Well, Guy, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciated the discussion. Any last words of advice you'd like to share or thoughts that we didn't cover so far?
I think we covered quite a lot. Yeah, I can't think of anything that we missed. So it's been a great journey. I always tell people it's a lot of work. It's been definitely the best job I've ever had. So and being in medical device there's an overhead and there's a lot of pain with the rigor and but at the end of the day, you also know that this technology is out there being used by oncologists to plan treatment and could extend people's, grandma could have 3 more years with their grandkids because of what we're doing. That's pretty powerful.
It is. It's exciting, powerful stuff, and congratulations on getting to where you are. I know it's not an easy haul. It sounds like, you've clearly had a lot of success. You've got a lot of great insights, and we really appreciate you sharing it with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thanks to everybody that joined us today to listen to the discussion. As always, it's great to have everybody here. Next month, I think we're gonna have a bit of a discussion on the state of AI and technology, where things are going, and what companies need to be thinking about in that space, again, to stay competitive, to keep up with the technology trends, and to just understand how this might change the complexion of software in biohealth and at large. So we hope you're able to join us for that. And so until next time, thanks Guy, thanks James.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
We'll catch you all next time.